Okay, hi everyone. Hello. Woo! Hi, welcome to Or Books live on Avenue C. My name is Olivia. I work at Or Books, which is a small independent publishing house that's actually located in the back of this bar through those beautiful arched doorways. We're very honored to share this space with the Francis Kite Club. And with that comes a fall series of events that we're doing called Live on Avenue C. This is the second one of this fall. Please, around these seats and the tables, you'll see the full schedule. We have an event next Wednesday with Eileen Miles, who's a fantastic poet and author of ours. But today you all know that you're here for the launch of this book, small but mighty book. It is called From the Flag to the Cross. We have both of the editors of the book, Michael Stephen Smith and Zachary Schuyler here. Michael will be moderating the conversation, and three of the contributors, Margaret, Kimberley, Richard Wolff, and Kshama Sawant, who actually flew all the way from Seattle last night to be here, are going to be joining us in conversation. So I'll pass it over to them.
Right next to me. Hi, nice to see you.
It's okay if I record you all for BAI.
Do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where is Olivia, do you want us to start?
Please go for it.
Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to see you all. I understand we're being recorded for WBAI.
Yeah, go figure.
My name is Michael Smith.
Microphone closer.
Can you hear me better now? My name is Michael Smith, and I'm the moderator. I'm going to talk to you about how this book was inspired, introduce the three panelists, and ask them questions. I want to thank my friend and comrade Colin Robinson, the publisher of Or Books. He's been enthusiastically behind this project from the beginning. And I want to thank his team, Olivia, Zara, and Anna Rotner. The authors all agreed that the profits that we make from this book will go to the Palestine Children Relief Fund. In putting this book together, I was reminded of Bertolt Brecht's insight that if we want to talk honestly about fascism, we have to talk about capitalism from which it springs. I was inspired by the pamphlet Leon Trotsky wrote in the 30s called Fascism, What It Is and How to Fight It. Our book on fascism, American style, attempts to do just that. Our book has 7 interviews that my former law partner Jim Lafferty and I did on our radio show, Law and Disorder. I had them transcribed, and Zach Sklar Zach Sklar, who's here tonight, and I edited 7 chapters into this book. We have 3 of the chapters' authors with us. They're Richard Wolff, Margaret Kimberley, and Kshama Sawant. Kshama took the red eye in from Seattle last night. Rick Wolff is a professor emeritus from the University of Massachusetts. The New York Times called him America's foremost Marxist economist. He's written a number of books, including Understanding Capitalism, and he has a show called, what's the show called, Richard?
Economic Update.
Economic Update on WBAI. Margaret Kimberley is the founder and editor of Black Agenda Report. She's written the wonderful book, tell me.
Presidential, Black America and the Presidents.
Presidential. And she's an activist with the UNAC, United Anti-War Coalition, amongst other things. I first met her doing the Julian Assange defense stuff, which we won. The format is when I get done, which will be in about 20 seconds, I'll ask various questions of the panelists. One final thought. Things are plenty scary. All of us in this room understand that. Huh? Oh, Kshama, I forgot you. Kshama, who's come on the red eye from Seattle, is the congressional candidate in the state of Washington. And she's got a shot at winning. Kshama was on the city council in Seattle for 10 years, where her militancy and independence brought Seattle's workers the highest minimum wage in the country. They're now making over $20 an hour. She got a rent freeze. She got an Amazon tax of $400 million against that big corporation and others. She's a real heroine of ours, and we're hoping she wins the congressional seat. As I was saying, things are plenty scary, and all of us here understand that. Trump figured out a way to get around the Posse Comitatus Act, which forbids the use of the military in performing domestic law enforcement. He sent troops to Washington, D.C., and I think he's itching to send them into our city, New York, to stop Mamdani. On Saturday, his fascist rally in Arizona, MAGA, made Charlie Kirk a Christian martyr. Trump declared that it should be illegal to criticize him. Think about the implications of that. I just want to conclude with this thought. As Ernest Mandel said, we are at the foot of the Himalayas without adequate tools, but we have to climb up. This book will help us. Please make the most of it. Thank you. I'm now going to proceed asking questions of the panelists. The first question will be answered by Rick, Margaret, and Kshama in that order. The question is this. We're not living under full-blown fascism, obviously, or we wouldn't be here having this meeting tonight. My question is, what is fascism?
Okay, let me start by being the economist that I've been trained to be, talk a little bit about that, and leave to the others some of the other dimensions. It used to be well understood what fascism was when there was so much of the world already in that situation. Germany, Italy, Spain, and Japan. And in those countries, it was a very clear arrangement economically that defined the fascism of Hitler, Mussolini, and the rest of them, Franco in Spain, and so forth. It had to do with a coming together, a kind of merging of the top layers of a political party, in this case a fascist party, together with the top layers of big business in their society. It was a kind of merger. And it was understood by them both that that's what they were doing. Suddenly, the leaders of the Nazi Party, for example, appeared all over Germany, arm in arm and hand in hand with the leaders of German industry. The leaders of German industry that some of you know because of their subsequent history. Hugo Boss, clothing manufacturer, Krupp, Thyssen, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and the others. And the reason the merger happened was because capitalism couldn't function anymore with the liberal democracy that it had grown up with. The old idea that capitalism was in favor of democratic parliamentary government had broken down. The working class was so angry, so bitter, that there was no longer any way to get them to behave. A little history. The last elections in Germany before Hitler takes power, which is in January of 1933. The last elections that happened in 1932, half of the German population voted either for the Socialist Party or the Communist Party. That half was the overwhelming working class of Germany, organized in unions and organized in those two powerful political parties organized in every neighborhood of that country. They were on the verge of saying to the business community, we will not tolerate this depression. Remember, it's 1932, so it's 3 years into the great crash of 1929. Unemployment is enormous. The German working class unemployed in a way it had never been, having gone through the greatest inflation the world had ever seen in 1923, and having lost World War I. Too much for any working class. Too few years, too many total traumas, and they were ready for the revolution which they talked about. The revolution, movement that inspired Bertolt Brecht, who was working right through the middle of it, along with all the others. The business community made a decision. It was break time, and they're going to have to choose, because the mass of the German people had no relationship to big business. It was a distant, ugly phenomena, period. They had no mass base. The working class gone to the socialists and the communists. There was one political option for them, and they chose to go with it. The fascist political party. Together, it wasn't as big as the communists and socialists together. Not even close. But it was big. And so a deal was struck. We, the business community, will give you all the money you need and all the support you need if you, the political party, take power and use it to enforce the capitalism that can no longer operate without the government making it happen. Knowing that history, my family was involved in it, so I learned it from my folks. You'll understand why, for me, the decision to send troops into Memphis or DC or Chicago or New York is part of a process of enforcing what would otherwise be challenged. Mr. Trump's economics cannot and will not solve the economic problems that beset this country. Sooner or later, the mass of people will figure that out. At which point, watch out, because the adulation of Mr. Trump will turn into its opposite. The only real question for me is whether the left in the United States understands this and will mobilize the organizations needed to give that moment the direction we need to get out of the situation we're in.
Thank you, Rick. The question remains, Margaret, what is fascism?
Well, I don't have anything to add to what Rick Wolff said, but I want to expound on what he ended with, and that is on the need for repression. They have to have repression. You have to have a system which silences college students, a system which allows ICE to just snatch people off the streets. Not just because Trump is obsessed with immigration and getting global South people out of the country, but it's a lesson for everybody. Anybody who stands in the way. I mean, people who photograph ICE, or a congresswoman, she like elbowed one of the ICE agents. She's been indicted in New Jersey. So we're just going to see more repression. And so you see this, it seems like Bizarro World, this elevation of Charlie Kirk, a podcaster who argued with college students and trafficked in racism. But the response of this apparatus they have, which tells people, go online, find somebody who allegedly praised his killer, make sure they get fired, and people are being fired. People are being harassed. People are being doxxed. In order for this melding of government and big business, which has been going on a long time, it's like in fits and starts, and Trump has perfected it. People don't want it. For them to, I don't know, they know that, so they put off their big, beautiful bill, as they called it. They're huge cuts in Medicaid, which it's going to impact millions of people. So what do? Well, we're going to put it off for a couple of years. The worst parts of it won't happen until after the midterms. They know that people are going to be angry. And the only way to deal with them is with repression. So they will make up, they'll say, well, we care about crime in big cities. Crime rates are going down everywhere. But the pretext is repression, to have an apparatus in place which silences people, which punishes people, and makes those who weren't punished too afraid to do anything. So that's my response to the fascism definition.
Thank you, Margaret Kimberley. Kshama, Sawant, what is fascism?
So yeah, I appreciate Rick and Margaret already speaking to it. Just to add to some of the points, especially that Rick made, historical points, I think fascism, Michael started the question accurately, which is that we're not in fascism now, so we have to define fascism accurately. Fascism, as it historically developed, especially in countries like Italy, Germany, and Spain, was reign under the capitalist system to specifically engineered to brutally crush working class movements. And it is not, and Rick alluded to this, fascism is not the preferred mode of operation of the capitalist class. It is much easier and better for the capitalist class if they can organize their system of massive exploitation and oppression on the basis of people generally being okay with it and liberal ideas dominating, and the capitalist class not having to use the kind of savage force that is needed for fascism to come into being. But they will do it if they need to. That's the point. And but also just to be clear why this today it's not fascism is also to understand that fascism for the capitalist class to carry out fascism, they require a highly organized base that will support it and also help carrying it out. Right now those conditions don't exist, but the question is very appropriate at this moment because those conditions could sneak up on us if the left didn't get its act together. In fact, the rise of fascism in those countries historically in the middle of the last century also were a reflection of the failures of the left. You know, the failures of the failures of the parties, the left parties at that time, the Marxist parties in actually pushing back against fascism. And I think that lesson should be taken seriously right now, even though Trump is not fascist in the sense that Trump doesn't have the kind of organized force that was needed to carry out fascism. One thing that's not disputable at all is the rise of right-wing and far-right ideas. That is absolutely happening, and that is deeply, deeply dangerous. And Trump wants to be totalitarian, of course, but he doesn't get to be just because he's a megalomaniac. Those, so the material conditions have to exist, and those conditions don't exist yet, but they could come into being, and that's where I think the warning has to be. I agree with Margaret. You know, one of the points Margaret was talking about was ICE. I mean, these horrific ICE raids, they are not only targeted at the immigrant community, which itself is unspeakable what is happening, and we all have to organize against it. But really, they're not even just that. They are really a pilot project, so to say, to see how far can the forces of the state go against the left, against working class movements. It's a trial method to see how far they can go in repressing people. But I think the elephant in the room in this discussion is the role of the Democratic Party and the labor leadership as well, because Trump did not rise up in a vacuum. Trump left his first term, as the most unpopular president in modern US history. How is it that this guy came back to power? This did not happen because somehow a mass of the working class is just irredeemably going towards the right. It's because the mass of the working class is angry at both parties, the Democrats and Republicans. So while Trump is carrying out his atrocities, which he absolutely is, and we should never make the mistake of underestimating how dangerous it is, but while that's happening, who are the most unpopular people in Washington, D.C.? It's the Democrats. The Republicans, yes, but all of them are unpopular. Trump is extremely unpopular. The Republicans are extremely unpopular. But the congressional Democrats are even more extremely unpopular than the Republicans. So the story here is that the rise of the right wing, let alone fascism, is in no way inevitable. It is precisely because there is no force that is actually fighting for working class people. And if we had such a force on a mass scale, then we will be able to absolutely win over many people who are otherwise susceptible to Trump's agenda and right-wing ideologies. Many of them can be won over to an actual working class movement. And I'll just end on this point. At this moment, the majority of Americans are against the genocide in Gaza. And that includes young people who identify as Republican voters. Only 24% of those who identify as Republican voters who are of the age of 18 through 35 are supporting the Israeli ethnic cleansing mission. So in other words, the question we have to ask is, how is it that even self-identified right-wing young people are against these horrific policies? If you look at the support for LGBTQ rights, the support for abortion rights, so many states that voted for Trump last year voted in bigger numbers for abortion rights ballot initiatives. So it's not only is it not true that the mass of the working class of the United States is just moving right and that's just going to happen. No, actually, the mass of the working class is angry at the billionaire class. They are angry at the parties of the billionaire class. And what is missing is an actual alternative to the Democrats and Republicans. And that's why I would say that our campaign, though it is, in one district in Washington State, our campaign against genocidal Democrat Adam Smith is crucial as a national campaign, because if we can win a revolutionary socialist office in US Congress, that will be nothing short of a political earthquake, because that is the type of fight back that we need against the Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you, Kshama. Thank you. My next question, directed at all three of our panelists, is this. How far along are we before fascism becomes irreversible? How do you appreciate Trump's bringing into line? That's the German phrase. Geschultung, the Germans used it. Bringing into line the Supreme Court, the media, the big law firms, the universities. And what do you think of his using the National Guard in Washington, D.C., and his recent announcement that it should be illegal to criticize him, and his recent declaring that Antifa was a terrorist organization? How far along are we? Rick Wolff?
Well, we're on the path. I don't know how far along we are. I don't believe anything is irreversible, so I'm not going to give that to fascism either. Hitler thought it was irreversible, didn't turn out that way. Mussolini thought it was irreversible, didn't turn out, and on and on and on. So the burden is on those who think it's irreversible. I don't. I think Kshama is quite right. Much of this depends on how we function. We can't say that the majority of Americans don't agree with us, because it isn't true. Mostly they do. And between those who do and those who aren't sure but would listen to us, we are talking about a majority. The American left is extraordinary, and we have to face that. We are the victims of 75 years of unrelenting Cold War ideological indoctrination. Look at my white hair. I was born into it, and I've lived in it all my life. So have most of you. I don't even know you. To think that that didn't settle in there somewhere, take root in your thinking, shape you in this novel, that song, this movie, whatever it was that got to you, would be naive. And one of the effects has been to teach multiple generations that there is something dangerous and untrustworthy in getting involved in a political organization, especially if it has anything that looks, smells, or sounds like socialism or communism. There is a deep feeling of that's not for me, or it's not safe, or I'm going to stay away from that, or I have other things to do. You know, in other cultures, and not that far from us, people are political. They talk about politics all the time because it's exciting, because it's what you do at the picnic. It's what you do with your friends at the bar. You talk about it. You argue about it. Americans don't want to talk about it. It's like in religion or sex or something else that's very private, very private. And that's why it's so hard to organize and mobilize on the left. That's why it's so sad to watch the organizations that get going then splinter into 47 groupuscules who spend more time, we all know it, right? Who spend more time attacking one another than they do their common enemy. The real question again is Kshama's question. When will the left get its act together? Understand that it's much stronger than it imagines. The weakness of the left is a tactic of the right to keep us down. Don't believe it. We are numerically enormous. Who amongst us would have imagined a year ago that a Muslim socialist would run for mayor and win. I am among those who would have thought that's a long shot. I would have been wrong. I would have misunderstood the alienation of voters in New York from the two parties, as Kshama pointed out, who are looking for something new, something different. The people I know who voted for Mr. Trump voted for him not because of his tariff policy, which they didn't think about or care about. They voted for him because he was different. He said things that made it clear, oh, he's not a conventional politician. Opens his campaign by telling us that Mexicans are rapists. All right. We don't understand it makes no sense, but we know that a conventional Republican and Democrat knows, don't say that. He said it. He proved he was different. Now, Mr. Mamdani doesn't have to, just his name. It's enough. Those people aren't supposed to be in that situation, but they are. And he is different, and he doesn't hide it. And a majority of New Yorkers are voting for him. A majority of Jewish voters in New York are voting for him. This is remarkable in this city and is a suggestion that the left is strong but disorganized, and that the response to fascism getting any worse is get that left organized.
Thank you, Rick. Margaret, Kimberley, how far along are we before fascism becomes irreversible?
Well, I'm going to agree with Rick. I don't think anything's irreversible, but we are very far along in a very dangerous moment. And we have to talk about the appeal and the impact of racism in this country. Trump, we have a racist country anyway. You know, it's funny. Trump supporters will say, he says what's on his mind. He says what's on their minds. So there are millions of people who are deeply racist, and to have a presidential candidate say, as Rick pointed out, the Mexicans are killers and rapists, although some of them are nice people. I remember that part. Yeah. And we see this racism being perfected, obviously against immigrants, but we're seeing it with this National Guard thing, where now Washington, D.C. is under federal control, so Trump could send the National Guard to Washington, D.C., but he couldn't pull it off in Chicago because there's a Democratic governor who said, no, we're not doing that. But he's going to states that are run by Republicans. So Memphis, Tennessee, majority black city, Democratic mayor, but the governor is a Republican and says, yes, we're going to do this. Now, there's no reason for this. However bad crime is in any particular location, crime rates are getting lower. But that's not the point. All these crime panics everywhere, here in New York, in Memphis, anywhere. They make black people the face of crime, and black people the face of those who need to be crushed. And one of the reasons the left is disorganized, lest we forget, is that the left was crushed in the early 70s. There was an active campaign to make sure we're not going to have this kind of activism again. The Powell memo, I think he was not yet a Supreme Court justice, telling was it the Chamber of Commerce or other people, listen, we can get rid of this. And so they did. And one of the ways that they did that was by crushing the Black Liberation Movement. And so now we have, and he's not the first one. Lest we forget, Bill Clinton, during his campaign, having a photo op in front of black prisoners in Georgia, in the town where the Klan sprang up, Stone Mountain, Georgia. Even Barack Obama sometimes saying black fathers are irresponsible. It's a constant in American politics. And let me just say, we had fascism already. It was called Jim Crow segregation. That was fascism. So So I feel like we're always on the edge in this country. But the thing that I'm most worried about now is warfare. Trump's, crazy rambling speech. He does a 180 on Ukraine, saying, Russia can be defeated. That's another feature of fascism, and that's warfare. It's military aggression. And we see that occasionally in U.S. history, but we now see Trump trying to start a war with Venezuela and Russia. They making up with China because they think they can split Russia from China. That's my belief. Gaza, Palestine, all of these things are what worry me. I worry about hot war. I worry about a hot war between nuclear-powered countries, and I worry about the ratcheting up of racist rhetoric and all the rhetoric that demonizes anyone who's considered an enemy. I mean, this whole Antifa thing, there's no group. Is there a group anywhere called Antifa?
No.
It's just, it's anybody they don't like. But so those are my thoughts, very far along, and to me, warfare is the biggest danger.
Thank you, Margaret. Kshama, what do you believe about how far along we are before it becomes irreversible?
Yeah, I definitely agree with my fellow panelists that nothing is irreversible, but we are in dangerous times. I definitely agree about that, and I share Margaret's anxiety about hot wars. In fact, we already have hot wars, and we have, a war that is devastating ordinary working class people in Ukraine and Russia. It's absolutely devastating. If you look at the numbers, it is unconscionable. And then, of course, you have the genocide in Gaza, but also not to forget that the genocide in Gaza is a means to the Israeli state's openly stated goal of ethnic cleansing. So, and that ethnic cleansing goal is the objective is being achieved through the genocide in Gaza, but also it's also going on, ethnic cleansing is also going on full swing in the West Bank. It is extremely dangerous and horrific. And if you look at the casualties now, for example, the estimates from the scientific study from the Lancet show that probably 500,000 or more than 500,000 Palestinians have lost their lives. That is not to mention all the amputations that have happened. I mean, it is absolutely unspeakable what is happening. But I think all of this, again, that we will simply be unable to find any solution to make sure that this situation today's situation can be reversed unless we understand what is at the, what are the forces that are driving all of this. And I think racism is an important question that we can examine. Jim Crow, for example, Margaret mentioned Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a systematic policy that was carried out. And obviously it was completely vicious against black working and poor people. But the reason it was carried out was precisely to prevent working class solidarity across race. And similarly, Fred Hampton and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. became very dangerous for US capitalism the moment they started talking about class and not only, obviously racism is a real thing, and you cannot, as a Marxist, I don't believe that you can fight to overthrow capitalism unless that fight also includes an explicit fight against all forms of oppression, including racism. But what makes the left, what could make the left dangerous, what could make working class movements dangerous, is precisely when there is a strategy to unite those who might otherwise be on the other side, working class people who might be on the other side. And I think it's really important to examine the failures here and also the betrayals, I think, which is a more apt word here, more appropriate word here. And it's not only the Democratic Party as a whole, it's the whole cabal of progressive Democrats, the so-called progressive Democrats. It is most of the labor leadership. It is most of the NGO leadership. It is tragic, but this is the situation, and unless we state the problem bluntly, there is no way we can find a solution. We have an obligation towards the Palestinian people, towards tens of millions of working class people in the US, to state the problem clearly, because otherwise we won't find the solution. And I think we should talk about what happened with the BLM movement. You know, there was the rebellion in 2020, which brought out over 20 million people on the streets of the United States in multiracial working class solidarity against racism to make it the largest street protest movement in US history. So I refuse to believe that we cannot win people, working class people over, like in masses, masses upon masses of people can be won over against racism and in a fight, in an explicit fight against racism. But what happened at the end of the day? That BLM movement has very little to show for itself in terms of victories, not because ordinary people failed, but because the leaders of the movement sold out. And so they were not BLM leaders, they were BLM misleaders. And we have to call that out, and we cannot pussyfoot around it. Doing that, you know, stating that problem clearly will make you an enemy of the labor bureaucracy. It will make you an enemy of the NGO leadership. But, sorry?
What are the names of the BLM leaders that failed?
There were so many. I can talk about the ones in Seattle, for example, you know, where I can talk from, you know, personal experience. Sorry?
Let's move along.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But just wait, one other example I wanted to give in terms of how people are not irredeemable, working people are not irredeemable, is that, yes, Trump won, one of the ways in which Trump won the election, one of the ways in which he tried to hoodwink ordinary people who ended up voting for him is that is the attacks on immigrants, you know, whipping up xenophobia, fomenting xenophobia. Yes, that is true. And anti-immigrant sentiments are a real thing, just like racism is a real thing. We cannot pretend it doesn't exist. However, we have to have a materialist approach to understanding how these consciousness evolves, and consciousness absolutely evolves. It is never a static phenomenon. Otherwise, we would not have come this far. We would not have won all the rights we have won for women and LGBTQ people and so on. So, you know, consciousness does evolve. But look at the real time in which it evolves. Even since the election last year, Trump has far little support for his anti-immigrant campaign than he did last year, because now that people are seeing the horrific manner in which it has unfolded, he has far less support for it. There is far more unity against the ICE raids, but what's missing is, again, the real forces that can do it. And so just one last thing I'll say is that, one thing that the labor leadership could have done and has not done is organize coordinated national strike actions, one-day coordinated strike action, shut down the profit machine, and see how it puts pressure on the Trump administration, but they haven't done it.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Kshama. We're going to have the next discussion, and it'll be the last discussion. But before we do that, I just want to say, from the flag to the cross, fascism American style, you can get it at ourbooks.com. My last question, starting with Rick, is the ultimate question. What is to be done? Why is socialism the answer, Rick Wolff?
The basic reason socialism is the answer has to do with a particular problem for us as Americans here in the United States. The world has changed in the last 25 years in ways that this culture that we all live in has systematically denied. It doesn't want to see what is happening. And it becomes crucial for us, as the first part of the answer, what is to be done, to face up to it. What do I mean? The dominance of the United States economically in the world is over. And it isn't coming back. I don't say that because I'm happy or sad about it. I'm trying to understand what's going on. Now, in part, we should have known and should have seen it. Our leaders should have known and should have seen it. The position of the United States at the end of World War II, 75 years ago, was weird in human history. All the other competitors we had, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Japan, they were all wrecked. They were all destroyed. We weren't. After the bombs fell in Pearl Harbor, nothing happened here. No factory burned, no railroads went up in flame, nothing. The percentage of our people that went to war, much smaller than any of those other countries. Not only that, we discovered, half-assedly, we discovered that the Depression, which was really terrible, was overcome in the end by one thing, the war. The war took half the unemployed and put them in a uniform, and the other half in a job making a uniform. And that was what ended the Great Depression. You know, you should have learned that lesson. You know why? Because over the last 3 years of the war in Iraq, a troubled Russian economy perked up. The war in Ukraine has strengthened the Russian economy, not weakened it. If you look at the statistics, the rate of growth of Russia in the last 3 years is significantly higher than the rate of growth of the United States. Now, if you didn't know that, welcome to the club. You didn't know, but you should have. The United States and its allies are something called the G7. They used to be the center of the world. G7, United States, Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. That's the G7, the center of the world. All right? I added up the GDP, the gross output of those 7 countries. That's what we economists do. We add things. I added it up. 28% of world output is accounted for by the G7. Just 7 countries out of 190 countries produce 28%. Then I did the same thing for China and the BRICS. It's 35%. The United States is not the center of the world economy. They crossed the 2 lines in the year 2020, and the gap between them is getting wider. That's Mr. Trump's problem, and he can't solve it. The rest of what he does is the repressive effort to keep the lid on this disaster for which the American people were never prepared. That weird situation at the end of World War II, of course it couldn't last. Of course it created an American empire, which would eventually go down like every other empire the world has ever seen. It was never a question of whether, it was only a question of when. And I'm here to tell you, it's already going on. That's why we have this weird government. That's why we have the turn to fascism. They can't manage it. You know, let me close. One of the things an empire going down does is to imagine it isn't. To have a theater that gets more extreme with America first, the more America is 9th. And as it becomes 10th and 11th, then the intensity of the make-believe rises in direct proportion. The United States also, as a declining empire, is doing another thing that declining empires do. It's borrowing secretly from the empire that's rising, which is called, in case you haven't figured it out yet, China. And again, I'm not an advocate for China. China has lots of problems. That's another issue. I'm trying to get you to see the dilemma that the Trump fascist turn is facing. In 1970, the total debt of the United States was a few $100 billion. Today, the debt of the United States is $37 trillion. That's a growth that dwarfs everything else. Prices didn't go up like that. Incomes didn't go up. Nothing did. This is a country living on debt. The United States, if you don't know, is the largest debtor country in the world. It has two major creditors in the world. Japan, number one. China, number two. Let me do that again. The biggest debtor in the world is the United States, and the second biggest creditor of the United States is the People's Republic of China. They own $750 billion worth of the debt of the United States. The next time you hear some grandiose, half-assed American politician telling the world, the Chinese, this is all blah, blah. This only flies because the press will not do what it ought to do, which is say, this is like saying in the middle of the night, the sun was shining. Doesn't work like that. The world economy is leaving the United States behind. That's why the latest high tech is coming from China. The best electric cars and trucks in the world are made by the BYD Corporation. And if you never heard of it, it's because it's Chinese. We have 100% tariff in this country against those cars. That's why you don't know about them. But if you go to the rest of the world, they're everywhere. Why? Because they're the best car at the lowest price. You live in a country that won't let that happen. So my conclusion, little lesson in economics. Everywhere in the world, the competitors of the United States, the ones who compete with any company and every company in America, some of them in Brazil, some in Europe, some in Africa, they're all able, when they do their business, to buy the best electric car and truck at the lowest price. The only competitor who can't do that is the American. Because he has to pay, or she, not just the $30,000 to get the car from China here, but another $30,000, that's what 100% tariff means, to Uncle Sam. So it costs them $60,000. So they don't do it. They buy an inferior car and truck for $50,000 because they can't buy a $30,000 truck, which is better quality. You know what that means for the future of American business? You're in the toilet. You're going down. It's going around and around, but that's not a merry-go-round. Those are the reality. Stop. I can see from your faces some of this may be too much. So one little one, just to indulge me. If China owns $750 billion worth of American debt, which it does, well, then you know, just like I do, that anybody who has a debt has to pay interest on the debt, don't they? Which means that the American government is collecting from all of you your taxes. And all the American government is doing is taking 40 to 50 billion of that money. They don't use it for schools or hospitals or old people. They simply make a nice package and deliver it to Mr. Xi Jinping, which he can use to build up the Chinese army. You don't understand it. That's because you're not brought into the real problems. You have to face those things. Otherwise, we're shadow boxing, and that will not be effective in defeating the fascism. It's out of the roots of the problem of a capitalism going down that all of the old contradictions we knew about, that we've talked to each other about, are now coming to the fore in very aggravated terms, and we don't have much time.
Thank you, Rick Wolff. Thank you. Margaret, I want you to field this question. Why is socialism the answer? What is to be done?
Well, I can't add to Rick's answer about why socialism is the answer. I mean, look at capitalism. You know, we're told, actually I am going to add to that. We're always told, socialism doesn't work, socialism doesn't work. Well, I've been to China. I don't see people living on the street. I've been to other revolutionary countries and didn't see that. What do we have? We have people living on the street. I had a medical procedure, and there's some form about a, what are they calling it, a facility fee? They're gouging us. Now you can't even go, yes, this was NYU Langone and other hospitals around the country. They're just adding something on. That's capitalism. It's predatory. It's taking from us. People, the things that people expected that they would be able to do, own a home, be educated, you can forget that now. And now they're openly telling you, you're not going to have a job. We're giving your job to AI. So I don't understand why there's anything to defend, frankly, or I think the better question is, why does anybody defend the idea of capitalism? But what is to be done? We have to tell the truth. We have to mobilize as best we can within the limits that we have discussed. Protest can't be performative. Yes, was it yesterday? A couple of days ago in Italy, there was a general strike about Palestine. They weren't just shutting down the ports, they shut down Italy. There was no transportation. People didn't go to work. People were fighting the cops in the street. And so what happens? The Italian government says, oh, we're going to protect the next flotilla, Freedom Flotilla, on its way to Gaza, because people made that real. And that's the history of this country, too, is people being in motion. How did Jim Crow segregation end? It ended with the mass mobilization. There's so many things that we owe to these movements. So we have to learn from those experiences. We have to learn from the 2020 mobilizations. One of the things that happened, that movement was co-opted. Remember, people were taking a knee in protest, then suddenly CEOs were taking a knee. Joe Biden was taking a knee. Everybody was taking a knee to co-opt this movement. So it's the kind of thing that we can learn from, and we have to think about self-defense in different ways. And I mean literal self-defense. Our food supply, one of the things they do with China is just make up BS, like China's buying up farmland. Do you know who owns more farmland than anybody in the United States? Bill Gates. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, that's your food supply. So we're talking about mobilizing at a very grassroots level, also at a big level, and we can't prop up these people who want to talk like they're going to do something because of Trump. And I want to say something else about how Trump won. It wasn't just people who Trump appealed to, it was people who didn't see a difference. Now, I'm not going to say they were right, that there was no difference, but when you have a political party that starts out as Biden started out, saying, I'm going to cut child poverty in half, and then the next thing you know, the COVID programs disappear, poof, they're gone, and they expect people to come out again. Kamala Harris got 6 million fewer votes than Biden got in 2020. So you cannot look to the Democratic Party. I'm not saying you can't vote for them, but know what you're doing. Be strategic about it and stop expecting these people. Of course, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are lame as hell. Their job is not to do anything. And you cannot be taken in by that. So we're at a very critical moment for all of us as human beings, as individuals, for the entire country. But don't reinvent the wheel. We've got to mobilize. We've got to educate ourselves. We are the most ignorant people in the world. The things we are taught, we have to be, I don't know what word to use, that we don't even know our own history and the histories of struggle in this country.
Thank you, Margaret. Well, all the way from Seattle, Kshama Sawant, you're going to have the last word on the question, why is socialism the answer? What is to be done? Let's conclude with your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question to conclude on, and I really appreciate the thoughts that Rick and Margaret have shared. I think to understand why socialism is the answer, I think we should say also just it's like a summary of what we've already said today, which is that the fascism is not a result of fascism doesn't come into being because there are evil individuals. Obviously, there are good and evil people. It's a material question. What is it that evil people can get away with, and what are the phenomena that come to the fore because of systemic reasons? And so, in other words, once we recognize that fascism is an outcome, a particular set of circumstances that lead to fascism, but those circumstances happen on the basis of capitalism, and so that should lead us to conclude that the only way to prevent fascism from ever happening again is to overthrow the capitalist system itself. That is the starting point. And I would say that we don't, in order to make the case that capitalism needs to be overthrown, we don't even need to talk about fascism, because the normal state of affairs under capitalism is absolutely unbearable for the vast majority of people. And so capitalism in its normal state, its status quo, is billions of people, animals, the planet, all of them suffering, and at this moment, the future of the planet itself being put into question. And so absolutely, we have to talk about a system that is not based on the accumulation of wealth by a specific class at the expense of the vast majority of others who are in a different class. In other words, we have to fight for socialism, which is a classless society. In other words, where actually ordinary people, billions of people, working people, have the ability, the democratic ability to decide what to do with the resources of the planet. Should we dig for more oil, or should we invest in renewable energy resources? Should we have high-speed mass transit? Should we have free healthcare? All of that. Should we have a high standard of living for the vast majority of people on the planet? But that cannot be done. We cannot wish such a system, and that is socialism, but we cannot wish that system into existence because it is morally a better system than capitalism. It will, because you can't control what you don't own. And so the fight for socialism, and in other words, it has to be a fight. Socialism can only come on the basis of a revolutionary movement or series of revolutionary movements where the fight is a specific one, which is to take, just to put it in a quick way to say it, the commanding heights of the global economy into democratic public ownership. In other words, our barrier to arresting the climate crisis is not that billions of people don't understand the crisis. Billions of people do understand the crisis. The reason none of us able to do anything about it is because we don't control the wealth of society. We don't control the oil industry. We don't control those resources so that we can then decide. And I'm fully confident that if the working class of the international working class had the actual reins of the economy in our hands, we would make sane decisions for the economy, for global society. And that is the reason we need to fight for socialism. And then I think it would be to leave it on an abstract note if we didn't talk about, Michael's the other question of what is to be done. I think we have to talk about that in concrete terms in the here and now. I would say, Michael mentioned the victories that we won in Seattle, which are unfortunately for the working class unparalleled anywhere else on the left. And the reason they are unparalleled is not because Seattle's working people are more ready to fight than in New York. Obviously, that's not true. And actually, working people everywhere in the United States, everywhere globally, are now ready to fight. They are angry. There is a boiling cauldron of anger globally. What is not there is a strategy to actually harness that anger and win some concrete victory. So it is not It is not a coincidence that we were able to win in Seattle because it's not a coincidence that we are revolutionary socialists and we won the victories. We won the victories precisely because the movements in Seattle had revolutionary socialist leadership through my office, and that is what we need to take forward nationally. And that is why I feel like there is no more fitting note for this to end on than urging everybody to get involved, like actually involved. It doesn't matter where you live, involved in our campaign. We are running, as many of you already know, we're running as an independent socialist against anti-war, pro-worker socialist, against Democrat Adam Smith. This guy has been in the U.S. Congress for 28 years. He has the distinction of being one of the 5 remaining Democrats in the House who voted for the Iraq War. He voted for the bailout of the big banks in the wake of the Great Recession. He voted for that repeatedly under both Bush and Obama. And because this has been a bipartisan project of screwing over working people and also the bipartisan project of war, he has voted more recently to create ICE. He has voted to fund ICE repeatedly. He has voted for tens of billions of dollars for the Israeli state's genocide in Gaza. And of course, he has voted for hundreds of billions of dollars for the occupation in Gaza. When the anti-war movement began last year, Adam Smith, called anti-war protesters left-wing fascists and demand that they be arrested. And so this is the guy we are running against. It could not be more night and day whom working people should support. And our campaign is calling for an end to the genocide, an end to the occupation, brutal occupation by the Israeli state of Palestinian lands. But more concretely, for that to happen, we are calling for an end to all US military aid to the Israeli state. We are also fighting for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich. We're fighting for national rent control, and we're fighting for a national $25 an hour minimum wage. And we have a chance to win. We have a chance to win. We can actually win this, but it is never automatic. Campaigns like ours are never automatic victories. We have only won all our campaigns because working class people in the thousands got involved in the actual fight back. But unlike our Seattle campaigns, which also had national donations, this is even more of a national campaign, because if we can win a revolutionary socialist elected office in the US Congress, which has never before happened, it is unprecedented, it would be nothing short of a political earthquake. I have pledged that if we win the election, I will turn my congressional inauguration into a mass rally in Washington, D.C. of 10,000 people, that we will immediately bring a bill to end all US military aid to the Israeli state, and we will put the Democrats as well as the Republicans on the spot. What are they going to do? And we will use our and we will use our congressional office to do what unfortunately Bernie Sanders, AOC, none of the progressive Democrats have been willing to do, which is use our office to build mass rallies and also mobilize union members to push for mass strike actions. We're not going to be doing a fight oligarchy tour that turns people back into the Democratic Party. No, we want to use, if we win, we want to use that as a platform to call for a new party for the working class, which is a step that needs to be taken if we want to prevent fascism, let alone if we want to win socialism.
Thank you, Kshama. That was terrific. And before we end the evening, I want to ask Rick if he's got a last word.
Yeah, I want to make sure people leave on an up note, which Kshama, in a sense, provided us in terms of her campaign. But very briefly, my family is French, and I want to tell you what happened last September 10th, a few days ago, in France. All of the left-wing parties, Communist Party, Socialist Party, the biggest one, which is called La France Insoumise, it means something in French.
Michael.
All of them got together. All of them got together and called for a day in which everything in France stops. And hundreds of thousands, millions of people went into the streets of France not just Paris, but all over France, on the 10th of September. Their immediate goal was to show their unity. Their second immediate goal was to demand the end of a program of Mr. Macron, a man whose distinguishing characteristic is that he has lower popularity than Mr. Trump. He had decided that one of the ways to solve French capitalism was to take two of the national holidays in France that have been observed for decades as public holidays and require that all French people go to work henceforth on those 2 days with no change in pay. Another way to help solve the problem, 2 free days of life. That's what's going through the minds of the leaders of Western capitalism. They went into the streets and demanded that he withdraw that. He did. It's defeated, it's gone. The French Parliament now has a left wing and a right wing. The left wing is a unity of all those left-wing parties. They are the largest bloc of votes in the French Parliament. The leading control of the French Parliament is the left-wing socialist and communist movements of France. Is unity possible? Yes. Can it win elections? Yes. Can it determine what happens and doesn't happen? Yes. What's the big difference? Well, France does have a history of going into the streets for the least excuse you can imagine, and revolution is a very popular way to go. But also they're organized. When my family, when I visit them in Paris, when we're there for dinner, the phone rings. Someone is interrupted. It's the person for their political party, I won't mention which, that is calling and saying, we need 2 from your household for this demonstration next week. And 2 people go. Because if you need something, the party will help you. And the party asks in return, when we need 50,000 people in 24 hours at the gates of the palace, you're coming. And they go. They grumble, but they go. Organization is what makes France's socialists effective in a way we could be also.
Kshama, did you want to say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just
Margaret and Kshama, and then we're going to stop.
Okay, very quickly. Frederick Douglass said, agitate, agitate, agitate. And that's an important thing for us to remember. Also read blackagendareport.com every week and listen to me on WBAI on Thursdays at 6. Study history. If you're able to travel, go to a country you're told not to like. It will be life-changing for you when you see how propagandized we are. But Rick is absolutely right. We do have this history here. It can happen again, and it must happen again. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Margaret. Kshama, say goodnight to all of us.
Yeah, I was actually going to say one thing which I forgot, which I was just at a talk at CUNY, but I mentioned it because it's very relevant to New York City, which is that in terms of concrete action, Netanyahu is going to be visiting New York City on Friday.
I think he's already here. Probably. Anyway, he's going to be at the UN on
Yeah.
Friday, and that's
So I think Friday is a very crucial day for the labor leadership, actually, and also the Democratic Socialists of America. They should be doing this. The Democratic Socialists of America leadership and the labor leadership should be calling for a citywide work stoppage and shut down when Netanyahu is speaking. And I think, sorry? But that's my point. That's why I'm making this point, that this needs to happen, but it's not happening. And one of this, this was at CUNY, the earlier talk, and a lot of the students were saying that a lot of people have gone to protest. I mean, there's protests across the world against the genocide. There is no question right now what the majority of people think about this, and yet it is going on. And that is where I think we have to we have to talk about the lack of militancy in the labor organizing. And Italy and Greece and France, where actually the dock workers and even more general strikes are happening, that is what we need in the United States, because United States is pivotal. Because United States, military aid to Israel is the backbone of what is happening. And also, the Israeli state only makes sense if we understand it as an outpost of US capitalism and of capitalism as a whole. It is not just because there's Zionist ideology. The reason they're going to cling to Israel is because it serves their purpose, especially in the new era of the US-China conflict. So I think that is why we need that type of militancy, but precisely because of what you said, because the labor leadership is actually an obstacle at this point for that to happen. That is why we have launched this nationwide organization called Workers Strike Back. We are not replacing unions. Many of our members are rank and file union members, but the reason we are building Workers Strike Back and the reason why union members and other workers are joining Workers Strike Back, because this is the only avenue right now for us to build the kind of mass fight back that we need, that is not happening inside the labor leadership, because they are tied both to the parties of the billionaires. You know, they are tied to the Democrats, and now some of them are making overtures to the Republicans, and they are tied to what I would call a business unionist strategy, which is trying to make peace with the bosses rather than going to class war against the bosses.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks, for coming. Appreciate it. Did you want to say something?
Well, first of all, right here, there are people from the campaign. If you can raise your hands, they're outside. Yeah, so please make sure that you sign. This is the political director of the campaign, Calvin Priest. And he was also the political director of the Amazon tax campaign, where we won a massive tax on big businesses like Amazon to fund affordable housing. And so yeah, please sign up at that table. It is, Rick was talking about organizing. That is how we have won our victories, by through having a very serious and nose to the grindstone type of approach towards organizing. But the starting point of our organizing is you guys actually signing up on our petition so that we can keep in touch with you. We can ask you to join us in campaigning. For example, a lot of our Workers Strike Back members and supporters are supporting our campaign, for example, first of all, by donating, which is extremely crucial. We have to raise at least $3 million in this campaign. That is a lot of money for a campaign that does not take corporate donations. The median donation of our campaign is $25. And we have, I think, almost 3 times as many donors as our opponent, because his median donation is $1,000, and he gets a lot of money from AIPAC. AIPAC was his biggest donor last year. And so first and foremost, we need your financial contributions, but also a lot of our supporters nationally are helping us phone banking. And then many are actually also traveling to Seattle, and especially important time, if you are able to travel, is right now on October 12th, we are having a big rally in Seattle on Sunday, October 12th. Many are coming from Rochester, Minnesota, Peoria, Illinois, New York City, New York. They are going to join us a few days in advance of October 12th, campaign with us on the ground, and then attend the rally. If you're able to do that, but it's a tall ask, but you can come next year. The primary election is on the first Tuesday of August of last year. So we've got a lot of work to do. We have real potential, but we need your help.
All right.
Website is my name, so thanks, Margaret, for reminding me. The website is my full name, kshamasawant.org.
Thank you. So we have books in the front for sale. Oh, we have books in the back for sale. We've got to clear off the stage because there's a band actually playing. So if you want to stick around and listen to some music, I'm sure some of the contributors might be. And thank you all so much for coming.